Batu, Barada, Nikto.
You must remember those words.
Gordon's alive.
You know what the Turing test is?
I know Kung Fu.
Dead or alive, you are coming with me.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Stories Out of Time and Space. I'm your regular host, Scott Weatherly, and as always, I'm joined by Julian Darius. Julian, how are you doing?
I'm devastated. I cry myself to sleep every night. And, if it's not the news, it's these fucking movies we have to watch.
Yeah.
Spurring my depression.
I have
the
to
world's
say,
coming unglued, Scott.
yes, us choosing to do apocalypse and post-apocalypse season at this point may have been my own mental health a bad choice. So
I hear
yes, yes, the doomsday clock is creeping closer and closer to midnight, and I'm all these are giving me nightmares. But yes, anyway, we are here. We are back to do a mid-season review. Going to go back and look at the first films we've looked at for this season. We'll discuss our Mad Max saga, give the scores, our thoughts on those. Then we're going to go back to On the Beach, The Last Man on Earth, The Omega Man, Silent Running, A Boy and His Dog, and The Day After. So then we'll start with those and we'll go through all of those. And we're also going to touch on our thoughts briefly and give our scores for our Patreon exclusives. So we'll also be talking about The World of Flesh and the Devil, The Quatermass Conclusion, and The Last Battle. But we're going to save I Am Legend because that'll go into our although it's out, it is on the Patreon. Go look at it, hear it, but just because it fits in with the trilogy. But yeah, chronologically, it fits with our later stuff. So let's go back and let's start with an overview. Then we haven't got to go through all of them, I suppose, in detail. But Mad Max. Now you started with we've done the full Mad Max saga. Mad Max, Road Warrior, Beyond Thunderdome, Fury Road, Furiosa. Julian, where do you want to start with that?
I'll go straight through and just say I gave the original Mad Max a 6. It's fine. It's there's stuff that's good, right? Like I like Mel Gibson, and the girlfriend, the beach, and some of the stuff with the cars. But it's not an exceptional movie. It's sort of fine.
No, I gave 6 as well. I gave the same about the same. I feel exactly the same. There's some really good stuff in there. There were some bits that drag on. I think some great characterization. It's one of those I think you can see the potential for what's coming. But it reaches a peak. Well, it reaches an early peak with Road Warrior. I gave it an 8.
Oh wow. I gave it a 7.75. So I'm splitting the difference so I can slightly put one movie ahead of another. But so an 8 is like it's great, right? So but really, I was so amazed at how much I loved Road Warrior. It was just such a joy to watch.
I think it's when I was watching it this time I realized how rewatchable it is as a film. Because it's not, it doesn't stick around too long. It's pretty swift in its running time. A lot going on, but also I think we point out there's quite a lot going on in that film. Like in the background, there's some really cool little details, and so many little things. So it's kind of it's got some fun ideas, and it's a massive step up, but it's quite a bold step up from Mad Max as well. So.
No, and I think those two are kind of thought of as like, well, those are the Australian kind of like low budget ones, and they couldn't be more different. Like that first one feels like not a student film, but kind of just like a low budget sort of like early entry. It's very rough, but it's really just trying to be like a tough cop movie, And the second one is the Mad Max we know and love, where it's just sort of balls to the wall, crazy characters, and as you say, just filled with detail. So much fun. so much just I can't believe I'm watching this. This
Yeah,
is so entertaining. Yeah, so I
and
really loved it.
there's practical stunts in that the end scene,
Mm.
which I think because I've been kind of conditioned more recently on Fury Road, which we'll talk about in a moment, to go back and watch that 83 Road Warriors 93, to watch that and then be like, oh, they were doing this 40 years ago, and they probably had much less health and safety than Fury Road. So yeah, it's it is really cool.
Yeah,
Um,
that climax is amazing.
mm.
So,
From there, go on, Thunderdome.
Thunderdome, I also gave 7.75.
Oh, okay.
So I really struggled with whether I think that I sort of instinctively I kind of like it a little better than Mad Max 2. It's meant more to me
Mm,
growing up. That's been the one that I was like, oh yeah, like I think that's great. But I think as I've gotten older, I see more. I mean, the plot problems, kind of, the train that appears out of nowhere. Like I mean, the
mm.
ending. I mean, some of those problems kind of have come to annoy me more and kind of make me hold back just a little bit. But I'm not sure which one of those I really like the best, but I have such a soft spot for Thunderdome, for Tina Turner.
Yeah,
What about you?
I gave it a 7.5.
Hmm?
Um, I do much prefer Road Warrior. I think Road Warrior sort of is slightly cleaner and more efficient in what's doing. But then, again, I think Thunderdome is massively underrated for what it attempts to do and what it presents. I think Tina Turner's fantastic in it. I think she's so cool as Auntie Entity. And how like Master Blaster, this whole sort of and the sort of the political dynamic between them and Max getting caught in the middle. If anything, that first half works great. I think the first half is brilliant. Barter Town stuff is really cool. It's the lost kids, the lost children bit, the way it drifts off into it's like it's a good idea, but it feels so sort of silly. And then you say the finale with the train and stuff is sort of a little bit ham-fisted, but um overall I think it's a solid and underrated film to me. I think it gets maligned because I don't know really because it's kind of messy, but
Well, and also it gets maligned as American, right? It gets maligned
yeah.
as kind of selling out, right? I like that we both love Tina Turner. You know,
Mm.
we really are brothers from another mother. Um, yeah, I like the Lost Boys, and I always have found myself thinking like, yeah, this is a sort of as an American movie, but you think about what that entire cargo cult storyline is doing. If you understand cargo cults,
Mm.
they're really questioning the nature of religion, the nature of like, yeah, well, that guy was king, like this is the way these stories grow. Um, so yeah, I mean, I find really those elements of kind of watching that society develop new vocabulary, new ideas, all of that really gives it a kind of core, or could corrupt some people in a way that
Yeah,
I would
yeah.
support.
Yeah. No, I agree. I think, looking back, I'll come to my idea at the end of this, but I have
Mm.
there's a thread running through these, which I've all of a sudden has realized. But anyway, we had a massive break for many, many years. Mel Gibson basically blew it, and made himself a bit of a pariah for saying some ridiculously awful things. But then, but never was able to make it back to the Mad Max as a thing. So we got Tom Hardy for Fury Road in 2016. I give that an 8.5.
Wow. So I have essentially what I have done is I have refused to make decisions. I have set Mad Max 2, 3, and Fury Road as above the rest, as like, adjacent to, straight up fucking great movies, right?
Mm,
But I've set them all at 7.75.
mm,
So for me, Fury Road is 7.75. I kind of like Mad Max 2 and Thunderdome as much as Fury Road. And, Fury Road is good, but, um, I don't know. It's beautiful. it's got the advantage of a lot more money, a lot,
Yes.
And look, it's amazing. It's very influential, but I don't know that I like it or think it's all that much of a better movie than I do the previous two. I think that I sort of I finish it and I think, well, that had amazing shots, but there's a kind of like hollowness to it that maybe I perceive more because it's more big budget and beautiful.
More
But
polished.
yeah, maybe. But there's a kind of like I'm left with a slightly less than some of its parts feeling, whereas with the previous two, I sort of feel like they're more than the sum of their parts, and have outsized influence for what they are. So
Okay.
I don't know. I have kind of
No, I see what you're
ambivalence
saying.
about this.
I think I am wowed still by that polish and that money.
Mhm.
No, I think I think the thing with I think Fury Road is almost, it's got the budget, and I think it would have been interesting if it had been Mel Gibson as an older Max, but it feels like the real distillation of of Miller's vision. Like there's a chaos to it, and it also sort of everything seems to come together. Like, I think the cast is great. I think Charlize Theron is iconic as Furiosa. Immortan Joe is a great sort of design for a villain, and there's so many details, weird like kinky details, like the people eater, from Gastown with his sort of fake nose, his brass nose, and linked to his pierced nipples and all this other stuff. Like, and the car designs are fantastic, but it's the fact that it also has like the editing techniques of things being sped up or slowed down, and then you've got the colorization of like the different areas and the music by Junkie XL, and all those elements sort of come together to me to be sort of like this thing of going, yeah, this is like, I can see how when on set this must have felt like insane chaos, like verging on like apocalypse now kind of danger and misunderstanding of what the
Off the
vision was.
rails.
Yeah, because I mean,
Yeah.
he had some ridiculous number of hours of footage, um, and then when it comes together, you're like, oh, this was edited within an inch of its life by his wife and stuff, but like it works so well. So I just think it's a fantastic film. I think it's a really well done. It's on par with Road Warrior. What I would say is I don't actually think Tom Hardy's a better Mad Max. That's wrong. I think the film is better. I do think Mel Gibson is a better Max.
Yeah, I think that I don't know. I mean, Tom Hardy I've never been blown away by
Yeah.
anything he's done. I mean, I think he's fine. I mean, I enjoy him. But yeah, he doesn't seem to have as much inner space as Mel Gibson. I can't believe that because some of that inner space is like anti-Semitic, Christian
That's
fundamentalist stuff.
some of that some of that inner space should have stayed in a space.
That's right. Yeah. Um, yeah. But no, I mean, I find your arguments quite convincing for these three.
The final one then, Furiosa.
So I gave Furiosa a 6.25. So better than Mad Max, but by a quarter of a point.
Yeah, I really went back and forth on this. Like, I wavered between a 6.5 and a 7. And I'm coming out, and I think I'm going to have to go like a 6.75. What for you then? Why is this lesser than some of the others?
It is a mess. I mean, it's a mess from start to finish. It's not in control of itself. It doesn't match up to the previous movie. It's not, and it's not enjoyable. I mean, those previous three are just pretty enjoyable from start to finish, and the ideas are dazzling. I found myself sort of halfway through Furiosa going like, I guess we're halfway through. Like, I haven't been amazed by anything and dazzled by anything so far. I just find myself kind of, and I think this happens a little bit with Fury Road, and that's part of why I'm just a little reluctant. Is I just catch myself out of the action and kind of analyzing, and I'm not in it as much. But with Furiosa, I'm analyzing like mistakes and misjudgments that the movie is making. And that really takes me out of it. And that doesn't mean that there aren't wonderful sequences and, cool visuals and cool ideas and all of that. But I think it's better than the first one. It's clearly not as good as those first three.
Yeah.
And it's just not as enjoyable. And it doesn't feel like outside of, I mean, here's a tough woman who survived. Well, we got that with Fury Road. I mean, that's not especially.
It doesn't give you anything extra, does it? And it's not. No,
the villain's bad. I mean,
Yeah. Well, that's my problem. When I first saw it, I will admit I was kind of like, no, this is amazing. It's really cool. I was sort of, I'm a bit of a whore for that kind of thing. Flashy and great. And I was like, oh, it's all good. And I really enjoyed it. I did enjoy it in the moment, but it's one of those things. I think as we discussed it and as I reflected on it, I think Anna Taylor-Joy is actually really good in it. I think she sort of, when she finally gets in, I think the younger version of her, actually, the kid they got, I think was really solid as well. I think she does a great job. And the guy, it's the weird sort of things, like the guy they get to play what's his name, Praetorian Jack. The other guy is like, yeah, I'm like, yeah, cool. You're kind of like a Mad Max proto version,
type,
yeah, but you're not kind of like hitting the charisma mark. You're cool, but you're not quite. But there's other bits that I think are really good. I think, oh, cool. I like to see how the Trinity of towns work. Like you're expanding the lore and all this other stuff. I liked all that stuff. My biggest problem in retrospect is Chris Hemsworth. Chris Hemsworth is where all the other villains have been like weird and crazy, but like, there's still been kind of like a weird inner restraint to them. His villain, whose name, no, what's his name? I can't remember what he's bloody called now. It really matters. Dementors, thank you. It feels like Chris Hemsworth doing a character. And that's the thing, like it looks cool, like he looks great, and I love his bikes. The chariot of bikes was cool, and there's some good ideas. But there's, as you said, I don't understand like why he's sort of given this sort of like Jesus-like introduction, and then they sort of like wash that away because you then realise that not everyone's supporting him. I don't know, it feels kind of contrived throughout the whole thing, his part in it. And it makes you realise that he thinks he's a character actor, and he's not a character actor. He would be better as a sort of a movie star, going like, you're a good-looking big guy, and you can do the big bits. Do the big bits, like be Chris Hemsworth. Like you're not a character actor. Like characters, Gary Oldman would have turned into like
I would love to see Gary Oldman as Dementors. My God.
Like that's a character actor. Like those are the sort of people you think about. So I don't know. That's the more I think about it, the more I think how distracting that character becomes for the rest of the film, and that's what brings it down for me.
Yeah, I just sort of feel like it's one thing after another, right? Like it's sort of like this is clearly your plot outline for like here are the things that happen.
Well, it's prequel. That's prequel plotting. Yeah.
Right, but I mean, usually those are stories that entertain me, right? I mean, like all I need is right, like that. I mean, a character had to get from this scene to another, we have this backstory. Right. I'm totally content, seeing that, that episode, that movie, whatever. I want to see what's going on psychologically, right? Like I already know the basic story, so sell me on the psychology and on the characters. And I don't see anything happening with these characters. It just feels like one thing after another. I feel like I'm watching the outline. And I think for me, you're right, Hemsworth is undoubtedly the weakest link. But, for me, when Furiosa is sort of put in the harem, and you're like, oh, okay, here's how she becomes aware of that, right? And then within minutes, she escapes. And you never see the harem again, except for the end to set up the next one. So none of that was important. Emotionally, it was just there to check the box. But she escapes in the most improbable, stupid way you could imagine. And yeah, there's a great shot, for that transition. But then suddenly she's a mechanic. And I'm thinking, and I just find myself watching this thinking, right, but I don't believe how she escaped. And now I'm also confused how she was accepted as a mechanic. And I guess I just have to ignore these things and keep going. But I don't care about anything that's being presented because she didn't escape, right? Like
Mm.
part of my brain is just going, well, she didn't escape. This was
Yeah,
stupid.
she's now just living in a different way.
So
Yeah.
everything I'm watching just has these big asterisks to me that I'm just like, I don't care about this. I don't buy what's being presented to me. Um, it's not that it's bad, right? I mean, I gave it a 6.25, but I'm just constantly like being taken out of the narrative.
Mm. It's one of those. I think it works as skits. I think there are some good skits in it. There are moments like the um the uh the first war rig sort of like chase, and battle, and there's some other bits like that where like cool. I don't. It feels a bit like it's got away from itself. This thing of like, okay, we're going to expand the law and expand the world feels a little bit like it's got away from itself, which is, I think, a shame. One thing as we're going through this, George Miller I'm convinced now, has an ethos, has a philosophy, which I didn't. I was thinking, oh, do they have a philosophy? Yes, they do. I've decided. Like George Miller does not like um what I would describe as evangelical leader types. He's showing the
Mm.
fear that every one of these films shows you the sort of like the potential for the despot, crazy leader from Toe Cutter, Humongous, even like Auntie Entity, to an extent, and then Immortan Joe, and finally Dementus.
That used
Um,
to be normal until the last 10 years, right? Like
mm,
despots, let's just be clear. Like we grew up where if you were a despot in cinema, you were a monster, right? It's really only been in the last few years where it's like, well, maybe Hitler wasn't that bad. There could
yeah,
be a good version.
Humongous is now a misunderstood. Um, yes,
Nationalist.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Make the wastelands great again, I think, is what he was trying to do.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Um, so yeah, no, I think, but as a saga, as an overall series, as a franchise,
Mm.
because I've been watching quite a few franchises this year, and sort of like I watched all of them, the Lethal Weapon films, the Bad Boys films, and now I did the Police Story and that. So this is the first sort of major sort of sci-fi film, but like I like it as a collection of films, as a franchise with ideas and being kind of like being sort of like weirdly inconsistent and all over the place. Feels like it's feels like it's like MO, and I like it for that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of dig that. I mean, I think for me, this is kind of like one of those short franchises, right? That's sort of closer to, Predator or Terminator, even a little smaller than
Yeah.
it is Star Wars or something,
Mm.
right? Certainly Star Trek or Doctor Who or something like that. Um, for me, it comes down to the quality.
Yeah.
I look, Fury Road has continuity problems. Furiosa has tons, and they really bother. It's the first one where they bothered me. But I sort of feel like, a franchise desperately needs quality.
Mm.
And if the quality is there, I can forgive an awful lot. But, you reach a point where you look at some of these franchises and you say, most of these movies are bad. Like we like one or two, right? We like Darth Vader or whatever, but most of these movies are bad and they're kind of riding the coattails of the first one or two or the exceptional one. This is so for me, what sets Mad Max apart is just the vision and the sustained high quality. And if your worst entries are, you know, a low budget, movie that's a 6 and a big budget movie that's kind of a misfire but doing something different and a 6.25 for me, you still have your batting average is remarkably high. And
Mm.
so I will always side with quality and, the bold works of art, even if they flounder a little bit, then, um, mediocre
Yeah.
stuff turned in, writing the fumes.
Well, I think that's what you said. You and I have always said like, I would happily applaud something, even if I don't like it, for being a swing for the
Mhm.
fences. Like if you're going to swing big, I'm always going to be like, yeah, well done. You really went for it. Didn't land with me, or it doesn't work. But you know what? You took your chance. You took your opportunity. Fair play. Like I'll
Yeah,
always applaud that. So I agree with that. Even
yeah,
you know, for the bits of like even for the bits of like say with Chris Hemsworth and stuff that don't work in Furiosa, there's still moments from like that idea is really cool. Like
yeah. No,
you've
I
gone for
agree.
something and that is ace. So
And I think your idea of doing it as a miniseries, like you're talking about scenes that work. I
yeah.
mean, doing it as, I mean, even if you cut this into a series of like online shorts,
Mm,
it would be pretty amazing, right?
yes.
You'd be like, oh, that's really good. So no, I agree with you that it sort of lives in the scene,
Yes.
and crammed together into a single movie kind of doesn't. It sort of needs more time and to let
Mm,
those scenes be episodes or their own identity.
yeah. It's the first one where I'm like it needs to be less energetic and sort of let it breathe a little bit. But okay, so that's the Mad Max franchise, right? We're now into sort of the main sort of series, and we're going to start with On the Beach from 1959. This rather subdued submarine nuclear apocalypse. Um,
Mm,
an interesting film. Uh, I gave this a 7.
interesting.
Mm,
Um, yeah, I gave this an 8.
mm,
Um, I was, so to speak, blown away by this movie. I think this is, for my mind, um, the movies from this era that I really, really love. I mean, I love Forbidden Planet. I love The Day the Earth Stood Still. I mean,
mm,
those are kind of like the thoughtful classics. And this is obviously a little more serious, a little more of a drama, but it's devastating.
mm.
And it's limited by its budget. It's limited by its time and what was considered appropriate to put on camera. But for me, this was, legit great, and kind of a real masterpiece.
No, it's good. And I think there are bits in it that work really well. Um, I think that maybe this is me more than the film to an extent of it hasn't stuck with me in the same way that other films have. And I think you say it's a drama, it's kind of subdued, and I have to think about it to think, oh yeah, that's what happened in that film. Now, like I'm like, okay, Anthony Perkins was in this. What was he again? Oh yes, like but I remember his wife. I remember the whole situation with his wife and the baby and all this other stuff. But like, and so there's moments or there's parts of this film I remember really well, but it kind of feels I don't know, subdued is a good word, and maybe it sort of fails to stick with me a little bit. But that's not to say it's bad. I mean, there's a 7. I'm saying it's good. There was still, I think, um, the idea, the concept that they've all been sort of corralled into to Australia, and they're considering moving into the Antarctic to sort of um, see if it's possible to survive in the world, and then and the ending in particular where they're being handed out the tablets. And there's a line, and there's families and like kids and stuff being handed the sort of the suicide tablets and stuff is devastating.
Mm.
Kind of ham-fisted a little bit. We said with the crowd with the banner, and there's a few moments like that. But even as it's sort of, I don't think there's anything particularly bad. It's just sort of feels sort of subdued and that sort of thing. But this is one of those films, and I'll say this with a couple of these films. I don't understand why this isn't better known.
Hmm.
It kind of feels unusual to me that it's got a good cast. I think the acting is good. I think the premise is solid. I think it all hangs together very well. Yet this feels kind of well, no, not kind of. It's forgotten. You found it and you sort of added it to the list, and I'm glad you did. But yeah, this is one of those films that you'd think people should be saying, as 50s sci-fi cinema, everyone, as you say, goes to Forbidden Planet and The World Today, The Earth Stood Still, or War of the Worlds, or the other ones we did, the Flying Saucer films, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a very different kind of film, and especially when everyone's going, well, War of the Flying Saucers, an allegory for America's place during the Cold War. And you go, cool. On the Beach isn't an allegory. On the Beach is telling you,
Right.
there's this awful potential for the world to be wiped out by the nuclear disaster.
Well, and for me, that's part of what sets it apart, right? I mean, so I gave this 0.25 higher than the Mad Max films, which I love. Now, on any given night, which am I going to want to see, right? I'm going to be more likely to watch Humongous, than I am, get beaten down, by, On the Beach. But that doesn't mean that On the Beach isn't the more mature, more, better made film. And I think when I think about what is the message, what stays with me about On the Beach is it's so devastating. And I think when we talk about, the apocalypse and, nuclear holocaust and all of this, I mean, the Mad Max movies are it'll be bad, but you're going to get cars with spikes and it's going to be a tough world, man. You might not survive, but it is going to be a fun video game, right? And On the Beach is just no, screw you. On the Beach is kind of in some ways obviously it's an earlier film, but it's kind of the antiseptic to it, right? It's the antidote to all of that just says, no, this is terrible, and you're really watching civilization fall in a way that is incredibly painful to me. Because I value civilization. I value what we've been able to achieve. And so the short-sightedness of humans and what it is that we're really talking about, I think it's really the closest to The Day After in that respect.
Oh, yeah,
I know. It's 59 is no, this is the one that says, no, you're not going to live with mutated ants after, a nuclear exchange in 1959, right? You're just going to slowly die, knowing that there's no salvation, there's no upside to this, there's no anything.
One of the things that I'm thinking about this film is I agree with what you're saying. I think it again should be talked about much more. Is the way that the different parts of the world approached this sort of looming nuclear Armageddon. It'd become a reality. We had seen the devastation, and it was there. It was in the world. The genie was out of the bottles, as it were. And in America, we've sort of said about we've got things like them, giant ants, or war with the flying saucers, or whatever. We have these sort of allegorical sort of it's an invasion, or invasion of the body snatchers, all these kinds of different things. It's always at an arm's length. It's a hidden thing coming into the country, isn't it? It's about but ingenuity and sort of brute force will overcome. Japan, who was hit, gives you Godzilla in 1954, which is this nuclear thing is a monster and it destroys. There is no reasoning with this thing. Australia, because this was an Australian film, wasn't it? It comes from Australia, and
I think it's really an American film.
It but it has this sense
shot
of
in Australia.
Yeah, but it has this sense of being in a different continent in a different way. That it's removed from, for fear of wants a better word, but the jingoistic nature of sort of approaching it with an American sort of hat on, or that we've seen with the Japanese hat on or whatever. This is much more it's less bombastic. It's a creeping death. And this is sort of she's an interesting take for 59. So it just stands there, and I think it should really be held up much more than it is. as part of that sort of nuclear fear of the 50s.
I like what you're saying about how it's sort of removed. I mean, and that does sort of loom over the film that, on the one hand, it kind of escapes being anti-American or being, overly sad by sort of like not showing you the Statue of Liberty collapsed or, something like that, right? But, and it also feels kind of like the events already happened and they've retreated to Australia to wait to die, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so there's a kind of fait accompli to that setting. I was thinking recently about ethics and about, if you think about nuclear Armageddon and, the end of the human species and of, a lot of animals and plants on the planet, clearly this is so unthinkably, unspeakably evil that nothing is a higher priority, right? I mean, your ability to get revenge on the neighbors that hit you, it would be better to have a dictator that lived, a dictatorship that lasted 100 years, that exterminated its population, that imposed, religion or, ethnic and racial strife, or enslaved people. All of that is insignificant compared to the evil of nuclear apocalypse. And I don't think that our brains are wired to understand that level of evil and destruction. And I often think that we are very bad at pricing or considering different levels of atrocity. And we get more mad about a celebrity who said something outrageous than we do about the thought of nuclear Armageddon, right? We get more mad about like massacring 5 people, which is terrible, and somebody should, pay the price for that. But we get more mad about that than massacring 5,000, and there's a way in which we are really bad at kind of pricing and understanding these things. And I think On the Beach drives that home.
Oh no, I agree. I think that's a really good point. I think there's like almost like an abstraction, isn't there, beyond a certain point? And I think it's like we do it with everything, like numbers. You can kind of understand a millionaire in your head.
Mm-hmm.
You can go, I get a millionaire. A millionaire is this, and I therefore could understand the word billionaire. But to be able to really articulate the distance between a million and a billion, a multi-millionaire and a multi-billionaire, like it's kind, we don't sort of we almost see it as a stepping stone. People go like, yeah, I've become a millionaire. My next stage is to become a billionaire. You go, cool, kind of a big step, and I think it's the same, isn't it? Like when it's closer to home.
I mean, you have 1,000,000, you have 1,000,000,000-dollar homes.
Yes,
right? Like that's inconceivable to a normal human, right?
Exactly, and I think it's the same, isn't it? When you think of these things, when you say to someone, I'll be careful when I put this, but like an attack, personal attack, a school, it sounds horrible, a school shooting or some kind of shooting where there'll be like, 10 children, 10 kids were killed. That is, a serious tragedy, and it should sort of encourage people to consider the gun laws that have resulted in that tragedy. Just suggesting. But what I'm saying is, like, it's easy
We're
to
on
say
the same page about that.
Yeah, you should, you look at it and you can see the families are demolished. You can see the impact of that on the community. You can empathize with that, right? You can go, I understand that.
It's terrible. It's madness. It's heartbreaking.
Exactly. Like, yeah, that grief is, heartrending. Then say an entire country was wiped out in a nuclear fallout. You can't comprehend it.
Right.
Because then you're like, so millions of people have been wiped out. Yes, millions. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, that's tragic. But I think because it's such a big abstract number, we almost distance ourselves from it and go, well, that's awful. That's terrible. But I can't imagine the wailing and the gnashing of the teeth in the same way that I would with 10 kids that were killed in a school shooting. And I think it's the same, but I think you're right that what On the Beach does is sort of goes, no, we're going to try, and I'm going to show you like what this means for the human race is the loneliness, the desperation, the car race, the chase. I think that the race at the end is a really good. This thing of it's coming to an end, so they have the race, the speed race, and there's guys
Right.
just flying off corners, or the cars are like tumbling and catching fire, and people are like, "Hey!" But you're watching it and going like, "Yeah, no, this is." They are sort of embracing this thing and going, "I'm going out on my terms because that's exactly what this is." And it kind of challenges you to sort of process that up to the end, and you know. I can't imagine what it must have been like in 1959 for someone sat in a cinema to be sat at the end of this and been like, "Oh, like I don't,
I mean, the suicide scene,
yes,
with the car. I mean, it's just like it's very understated, but I mean, there are shot after shot after shot that are just
whoa."
devastating.
Anthony Perkins' character, like with his wife and baby at the end of the
Hmm.
film, like it's as you say
Oh,
understated, but it's really like you know it's going to challenge you in a number of ways.
well, I sort of think to return to your point that sort of anything that our brains classify as an atrocity level
Mm.
event is at the exact same level as every other atrocity,
Yes,
right? Like,
exactly.
and so like somebody having their house illegally, confiscated by the government, and you know how their family suffered, they were homeless, whatever. That's terrible. That should never happen. It's not as bad as the school shooting, right?
Mm.
Like it is an order of magnitude or two orders of magnitude less than the school shooting, right? Um, which is several orders of magnitude
Yeah.
less than a massacre that wipes out a thousand people. I mean, and then you think about millions, in some of these genocides, World War II, Stalin, Southeast China. Our brains can't take them in, and so it's sort of like I think logically we process like, well, if all the whales die and the entire ecosystem collapses on our planet due to environmental degradation, like, of course I care about that. That's bad. On the other hand, uh, Bob is fighting an unjust tax bill, and that's starting to feel like an atrocity to me. And that my brain kind of weighs them on the same level.
I agree.
Um,
Yeah.
and I really worry about this
Well,
as
I
we
think
now have the technology to
yeah.
destroy, the planet as we know it.
Well, I think that's it. I think that, we are basically, you could make a version of On the Beach today and it'd be about ecological disaster.
Hmm.
And it would be the same story, a very similar story, where it's just like, no, we have done so much damage that we are now living on this small island or small part of Australia sort of thing. So, yeah,
With plastic in our guts, coughing it up, slowly dying, like, oh,
yeah.
okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we no longer take things out of the packaging. We just eat the lot because we might as well. Um,
Yeah.
okay, let's move on to something a little more cheery.
Well,
The Last Man on Earth, Vincent Price.
do you want to look at the world of flesh and the
Oh,
devil?
we
Do you
do.
want to
Yeah,
jump to
the
that?
same
Because
year. Yeah, go on. Let's
that
go.
was Patreon,
It
but it was
was.
a few months earlier than On the
Mm,
Beach. But I think it kind of goes with the Last Man on Earth and the Omega Man as kind of people alone in much more urban landscapes.
yes, yes. Well, yeah, the World of Flesh and the Devil. If you want to see the full review, go check on the Patreon. It's there. £5 a month. You'll get that as well. So I'm not going to give too much away here because I don't want to spoil it, but we'll give our scores. Um, but the interesting thing is it has Harry Belafonte in, which is the only film I've ever watched with Harry Belafonte in.
And he's
Um,
good.
he's good. Yeah, yeah, he
Yeah.
is. I think the cast are good. I think this. I gave it a 7. I'll start with that. I gave it a 7. What
I
about
gave it a
yourself?
6.5.
Mm,
Yeah, and I think it's elevated by Harry Belafonte and some of
mm.
the uh I mean, I can see myself writing a paper about, how even after the apocalypse, um it's unthinkable to have, what was called miscegenation.
Yeah.
Like, even that term strikes horror into my heart. It feels like I should be twirling a very thick mustache.
Yeah,
but you know,
this film did catch me off guard a little bit, and I think you're right. I think it's one of those that is spotty in places. I think it's sort of like, it wants to hit certain things. It does some very, very good things. Harry Belafonte becomes sort of, or he believes he's the last man on Earth, and then it's in New York, and then you have the relationship with him and the woman and this other man, but this idea of like, these are the last Harry Belafonte, a black man, and a white woman, and they're still concerned about interracial relations, and how it sort of it sort of they get close, but it keeps seeming to be a wedge between them because of cultural norms. Is interesting, and I think it's mostly played well. I think there are some times when it's a little, again, it goes off the rails a little bit.
Well, and as a white person and as a white American, it's very painful to me to see how internalized some of these messages are, right? Because, like, I want Harry Belafonte to say, like, I'm as good as you, and, like, screw the old world. This was stupid, like, we should have torn it down before the apocalypse. But, yeah, I enjoyed this.
It is good. I think, like you say, the one thing I'm taking away from some of these 50s apocalypse films, regardless of what happens, men are still going to wear suits. That's still going to tie their tie.
That is true. I mean, the gray flannel suit, the uniform of the 1950s,
will sustain.
Unthinkable. Yeah. Like, today, no. I mean, I wear suits on occasion just for the hell of it. But nobody wears suits, right? I mean,
No.
like, I live in Hawaii where it's considered formal to wear pants.
Yeah. Post-COVID, I'm pretty much dressed like certain people out of the Mad Max films, just on a daily basis. So, how far we have fallen. Yeah. The one thing I would say again, the World, the Flesh, and the Devil, I say I got a 7, is just some of the cinematography as well. It's a real feat. Some of the shots of deserted New York, and also in the finale, which I think we both discussed, sort of is a little bit silly at times, but some of the shots of Belafonte running through the alleyways and the guy sort of on top of the buildings and stuff, some really, really well done cinematography. So it works.
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, and what's interesting is kind of like these three films I kind of all think of as a unit, right? I mean, they're all sort of guy alone in some sort of landscape that, at least is suburban, maybe urban, ultimately finds other people, and the movie goes off the rails, to one degree or another. But they all have like sub themes. And to me, the racial sub theme is more interesting than some of these others.
Yeah. I think what you're saying is, though, that the general theme is you're better off on your own. Because the moment they
that's been my conclusion about life.
Yeah.
I think I'm done with humans.
Yeah, gonna live in the woods. But yeah, there's another man wearing another flannel suit. The Last Man on Earth, jumping forward to 1964.
Well, so the difference for you is that this man happens to be Vincent Price.
Yes.
So I gave this a 5. I think that I like Vincent Price. The ending, with the church and stuff is good stuff. But it's laughably bad in places. Come out. And I'm glad I saw it. It's entertaining. Enough for what it is, but it's not as strong for me.
No, I actually gave it a 6. Again, I like Vincent Price. I do. I'm a big Vincent Price fan, but even on the episode, I said he's miscast in this. Like, this is not Richard Neville. Made worse by the fact that I've read the book and I'm a fan of the book, so I very much enjoy the book. Now, this sticks in part relatively close to the plot, if not the tone of the book. And so, I just think there's some good bits. I mean, I like the bits of them sort of taunting him and stuff and going around. And I think the other one, we said the one time it works is in the flashback when it's his his daughter gets taken away.
Mm.
And he confronts the sort of the soldier or the cop or whatever, and the soldier's like, well, mine too. Basically, my daughter's in there too. There's some
Yeah,
moments like
that is
that.
a great sequence with the
Yeah.
burn pit, the mass grave. I mean, that is really
Yeah.
the best part.
And there's a couple of moments like that where I'm like, oh, really? No, like the ending, as you said, sort of as you see them all walking in and into the church, and they got kids, and there's this whole new society, and they all turn up and burn him out of his house and stuff. I think all that is good, but it still sort of it misses the tone for me. And yeah, it's a fine. I think but I think for me, Vincent Price works better when he works better when he's the villain, when he can play the arch villain in things. He's so much more fun in those kind of things, and yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, I in trying to figure out the rating, I did think about those sort of like two scenes that are really strong. I think the mass grave is even stronger than the ending, even though the ending is more famous. But I could not get over just those moments of sheer embarrassment for the film, which
Yeah.
unfortunately kind of drag it down for me. It's hard for me to go too high or give the thumbs up.
No, I
And full
agree. I think
endorsement.
it does. Um, it does suffer from some moments when it's sort of like, and I do think it's one of those where like maybe that scene would have worked better if it had been somebody else in the cast as Richard Neville. So yeah, but in contrast, 1971, we have the macho version of the story. We have the Omega Man with Charlton Heston. I actually considered this. I think I gave this a 6.5 because, well, what was your score before we get into that?
Well, I considered this too, and key for me was that I think Heston's better than Vincent Price, even though I like Vincent Price better as a person and an actor. um, you know, but ultimately, I think this is even more confused. Like it's more better budget. So I mean, I ultimately gave this a 5 as well.
I like the reason I give it a 6.5 is I think Heston is better as a Neville character. I think the opening bit works more. I really like some of the opening bits when he's on his own. The bit of the phones ring in and all that kind of stuff looks good. And like you said, his interactions when he's on his own, he's sort of playing chess with the bust of Caesar, and I could watch that. Again, I think we said this. Like, that bit when he's on his own, and even with some of the mutant people, I could watch that like all day long. Like I think some really cool stuff in there. It's kind of interesting. It's when it expands that it starts to sort of fall apart. But it's still got action. I should highlight. So yeah, there was stuff in this I really like, where I think it kind of feels very 70s. I think it has that sort of like feel. That sort of blaxploitation was on the rise at this point. The same year as Shaft, so it feels like it's got that sort of like pang to it as well, which is both cheesy but kind of cool at the same time.
I know what you mean. Yeah, like I'm glad. Yeah, but I mean, again, it's like compare that to Harry Belafonte. I mean, I'll take Harry Belafonte any day.
100%. Yeah,
a Black 70s villain that I'm kind of cringing, watching.
Yeah. Well, we got called. I want to just highlight this sentence. We got called out for this one on our YouTube
really?
channel. Yeah. So I'm gonna, I'm not beyond. They didn't give their real name, but they did call us out. Smart Cookies is what they're called on that's their handle. And they made a couple of points, which to be fair, it got personal because they were like, "You don't understand movies at all," which was a little bit harsh. But I was like, "But the points they made were kind of
also
valid,
objectively incorrect, right?" But
yeah, but they made a couple of good points. One of the things is they said this was ahead of its time, in the sense of it was kind of an early iterative version of what's like people like Stallone and Schwarzenegger were going to take on in the 80s. That sort of like action sci-fi horror. And I was like thinking of like The Running Man or Demolition Man or anything. I was like, yeah, all right, cool. I'll take that. That's a good point. So Heston I think I know, and I will hold Heston's, hold my hand up to Heston to be like, dude, there's nothing if not open to doing progressive sci-fi science fiction. Planet of the Apes, Soylent Green, the Omega Man. So fair play on that front. The other one is we obviously complained. I prefer the vampires of the novel to the mutant sort of like photosensitive people in film. And the point they made is, well, by this point, because of things I'm assuming like Hammer Horror and a few others, vampires have become kind of passe and a bit silly. And so to do that with this of the mutants was sort of like a different take. Than I was like, and they make the point of, although it says it in the credits, it says based on a book by Richard Matheson, it doesn't claim to be I Am Legend, so it's obviously called the Omega Man. So I'll take that as a fair point. There's the points that should be made. This is ahead of its time to an extent, and also I understand that for the '70s, early '70s, like they were trying to move away from vampires because they were linked with Christopher Lee and that sort of thing. And
yeah, I have no problem with it not being vampires, right?
yeah,
I
yeah.
mean,
You were more fine. You were more fine with it than I was. Yeah.
I don't care about that, and I certainly understand that point that's being made there. I think that probably at the time was a good choice. I certainly understand that point and don't disagree with it. My problem, and I do think that it's historically interesting as a kind of like prefiguration of the sort of like 80s macho action thriller. The problem is it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, so like it deserves that credit, but it's, it doesn't work. And I think that the thing that bothers me isn't the vampires or that it deserves that credit. The thing that bothers me is that, all of these three films kind of take a turn and don't resolve well. This is the worst resolution out of all. That nothing makes any kind of sense. And if you want to talk about the vampires, like, or the zombies or whatever, they seem both illogical, shades and also, calculating. And, you pointed out that was the combination of different classes of vampires from the book. But I don't care that they're not vampires. I care that your depiction is bad.
Yeah.
Right. So, like, if it takes a while to turn into one of them, and then, the black woman who's the love interest, you see turn into one, and suddenly she's enthralled, and it's like, how does that work? Like,
yeah, that didn't make any sense. That scene where she looked like,
the ending is filled with stuff like that, right?
Yes.
Where it's just like, why did they kill that guy?
The kid,
the black kid who escapes, and like, what is the message we're supposed to take from this? I mean, it's just, it's so inconsistent and stupid at the end. And look, Heston is good. The macho action thing is good. I love his sort of penthouse. I think that's really well done. There are things in here that are well done, and I accept the comment, especially that it prefigures the action movies. But to me, the problem is that the plot just collapses and doesn't give a shit about how badly it's collapsed.
That's the biggest problem. No, I agree. The last 15 minutes feels so all over the place. And it just kind of falls apart. It really does. In those last 15 minutes. So things like, like you said, the black kid sort of going back to the villain, but then being killed, and then then the woman sort of turning, but we never. I still can't figure out where that actually happened or how. And
while
then
she was shopping, but then she hid it for dramatic effect. I mean,
yeah. And then obviously the final resolution, with Heston being killed, which is right because that's how Neville should go out, really. But
But he's killed in like the most Christ-like, stuff
Spear
that would make Scott Snyder cringe, And not to mention this group of survivors who
that's the point.
Totally uncharacterized, and they just drive off in their hippie Scooby-Doo van. I mean,
yeah, that's the thing. It's this thing about survivors, because the point of this is supposed to be that it's supposed to be like the ultimate bleak ending. The I Am Legend is I am the last man on earth kind of thing. It's supposed to feel bleak, and to have this sort of thing, we've found a serum that might save us, and we're going to go off and do stuff. It's tantamount to what is in the I Am Legend with Will Smith, but we'll leave that till later. But yeah, no, but I just want to make a point of saying, we are not infallible. At least, I'll
What?
confess it. Yes.
Speak
So
for yourself, Scott.
we are open. I am open to being called out on missing things or
Hmm.
misinterpreting things. So, but guys, if you're gonna do it,
Absolutely.
like, give us feedback. We want the feedback. I appreciate the comments, and I'm happy and thank you, comment, smart cookies for making the comment. I appreciate
I'm in.
the interaction. Just don't get personal. Like, there's no need.
Yeah. No, I agree with that. We're open to criticism, and we want to reward this person
mm,
by
fair
look. We
play.
talked about them here.
Yeah.
Um, to return to the film. I mean, I sort of feel like if this had been Arnie in the '80s, I'm fine with it, right? Um, you
It was almost
talking
Arnie in the
about I Am
90s.
Legend.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you talking about I Am Legend, I think raises two possibilities, right? One is that, we're both convinced that a real adaptation and a faithful adaptation of I Am Legend deserves to be made, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that it needs to hit, on those key points. Having said that, every adaptation is a change to the original. I have no problem. Look, we both love Total Recall, right?
Mm.
Total Recall has nothing to do with, you can get
And
them,
thank
we
goodness
can
it
remember the
doesn't.
movie.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's nothing's wrong with, diverging from the original. You have to make
Mm.
choices. That's fine. It should be a strong presentation of, that new thing. So I have no problem with both an I Am Legend faithful adaptation getting made and a remake of Omega Man as a, 90s style action thriller. I'm fine with both of those existing. But my problem is that this doesn't really do that. And it
Yeah.
really collapses,
That's the
makes
biggest
no
problem.
sense. It's painfully sort of
Mm.
bad. And I want to like it more because it's influential, right? I mean,
Mm.
I get that it's influential, points to that, but
Yeah. Yeah. But you're right. I mean, I think, to what you're saying, I've read like Who Goes There. I actually quite enjoy The Thing from Another World, and I like The Thing. They are variances on that story, and they're all told differently, but I think they're all quite good. Anyway, we shall move on. We shall move on from macho to ecological. Um,
the complete opposite of
yes, yeah,
macho to like a thoughtful, skinny dude who thinks a lot, and cares about trees.
yeah, yeah. Silent Running from 1972. I can't remember who went first now.
Yeah, this is mine. I'll go first.
Hmm.
I'm sure this is going to be more than you, but I rated it a 7.
Okay, yes, I gave this a 5.5.
Whoa, interesting. We're a couple where we're off here by like
Mm.
1.5. Yes. Okay. So let's talk about this discrepancy.
Yeah. Again, this might just me. I think but yeah, this there's one of those ones where it never sort of there's interesting moments in it. Like it's one of those things where I think to me this film is more interesting for some of the points it's trying to make rather than the film that I'm watching. So, for example, I like the fact that the three sort of like jock-like astronauts are wearing red, white, and blue, and when they're sort of racing around and all that kind of stuff. And um, there's some of the little bits like that this idea of Earth basically not wanting to fund this thing anymore, and all these other things. Like some of those ideas are interesting, but this film does not hold my interest. And although there's the ecological idea and theme of it, it kind of I don't know, it just never grips me in the way that I
Hmm.
think it has done a lot of other people.
That's fair. I mean, I think I like, and I know we both do, this sort of like small stage kind of
Hmm.
thing, the small cast. I like sort of movies that take a small idea and follow through on the implications. I like that he's, even little things like that. He's sloppy, and starts eating the, processed food. Um, I like how sort of it's a small story. It's a short film, you know, for most feature length films. But it's interesting. You know, I mean, I find myself, it is a little more engaging cerebrally than it is
Mm.
viscerally, right? I mean, Mad Max, this is not, right? Um, but you know, I like the sets. I like the design. You know, I like the characters for the most part. You know, it's thoughtful. It's got problems. It's not perfect. You know, the
Mm.
Joan Baez songs are kind of impressive, but also like a little dated and painful. Yeah, I think you like those better than I do.
Mm. I like the
But
music. Yeah,
yeah, but I mean, this is different. This is doing something that's different. It's a little more thoughtful. It's a little more message focused, but it doesn't make its, you know, environmentalist, you know, main character a hero.
yeah.
In fact, it doesn't flinch from the fact that he's terrible in a lot of ways and makes no difference, right? It's not saved the world or anything. So I thought this was, you know, ahead of its time. It's, you know, obviously it's ecological, it's thoughtful, and you know, I enjoyed it.
Yeah. I think that my favorite bit is the opening. I think when it sort of pans through, like, the music's kind of cool and it's all sort of very folky and countryish. There's some good scenes in it. You know, I think you're right. I think the moment where he's eating, is it a mango or some sort of, he's eating the fruit and they're eating the process,
Yeah.
fully processed foods. And they're like, well, what's the difference? Like, you know, and he's like, oh, I earned this. You know, I've worked for this. I've grown it. And there's things like that I'm like, so there are some nice scenes. Um, I think, yeah, I don't. What's funny is, and I'll sort of before we move on, is I'm often a sucker for like a cute anthropomorphized robot, you know,
Yeah.
and for some reason these ones don't work for me in the way that like you know, like I'm enamored by like the Scutters in Red Dwarf, like,
Yeah.
but for some reason,
You like the weird eyed robot in Black Hole?
yes, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's things like that. Yeah, like, I like that kind of thing. Like, you know, but for some reason, like these robots in this don't. I get you're supposed to have like an emotional response when, you know, I forget which one,
Yeah.
Huey or Dewey gets left behind and stuff. Um, but yeah, and which I kind of sort of do, but I'm
Yeah.
like, but like it does. I don't know, but like, you know, it's.
It it can't figure out the AI undertones that it really has, right? You
Mm,
know, the robot sentience thing. You know, and we pointed that out in that episode that it really doesn't have anything to say there. Those are like, obviously it's an environmental movie
yeah.
that has implicitly gets into all of that, but isn't really interested in exploring.
Mm,
I think that I sort of feel like I think that I sort of use like maybe like around a half a point of a rating as
mm.
sort of whether I think it's ultimately about something or feels like it was, ironically, a good meal, right?
Yes,
And you know, I recently watched the Super Mario Brothers movie,
the
which got
cartoon.
sort of no
Uh,
the recent
Oh,
Super
okay,
Mario
I thought
Brothers
we were going
movie,
to
the
go like
first,
full
yeah,
Bob Hoskins, John
no, no, not the
Leguizamo.
80s one. And I was surprised how much I enjoyed it. I
Mm,
laughed in several places and, you know, I recommended it to people. You know, I never thought I would enjoy it. But, you know, I mean, it's better than a lot of, you know, animated movies that people like better, I thought. You know, ultimately, it's totally vapid. It has nothing to say,
yeah,
but they go from one interesting place to another. And, you know, so it's sort of entertaining, but it leaves you feeling like I had an empty meal that, you know, wasn't without any nutrition, but really, you know, I don't feel energized. I don't feel good about this, right?
yeah,
Not the worst ever. But, you know, it's a difference between like a Chris Nolan movie and, you know, the Avengers, right? I mean, the Avengers is glitzy and wonderful, but at the end, you're like, that was a hot dog, and I feel sick to
yeah,
my stomach, you know?
yeah,
Uh, and you watch even a bad Chris Nolan movie, and you're like, I'm going to think about that, right? Like, that was an actual meal. And I think with Silent Running, you know, I see all these flaws. I think, you know, I could easily go like 6.5, you know, that would be 1 point difference with you, but I sort of feel like like that, the world of Flesh and the Devil, I sort of feel like there's something, they're about something. They don't have to present a full thesis to me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to feel that they're a firm research paper or something, but that there's a kind of soul to the movie. Whereas Omega Man has no soul, right? Omega Man is, at best, entertaining action, right? And so I sort of leave Omega Man feeling like, not sure why that exists. I don't feel good leaving it. I feel good about Silent Running.
Yeah.
If that makes any sense.
No. I completely understand what you're saying. I understand what you're saying. It's sort of, nourishment for the mind and the soul. Is it, is it help, elevating your understanding of things? I think it can do. I just don't think, or maybe I wasn't in the place for that at the time. I think if that's the thing, if I'd have been in a different mood or place, when I came to it, that could have affected by a half a point or so. Like that's the thing, isn't it? I think, how does it make you feel? So yes, okay, well, moving on then. A film that did make me feel something and think about things is 1975's A Boy and His Dog, inspiration for the Fallout series, as we've sort of highlighted.
And a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Surprising influence, yeah.
Despite its influence and everything else, I also gave this a 5.5.
Well, we are synced here. I gave this a 5.5.
Yeah.
What's interesting is we're synced here, but this is a point and a half lower than Silent Running for me. But at least we see eye to eye.
This is an interesting one, isn't it? This is
got good stuff, right?
Yeah.
It's got stuff to really recommend it, but also like its bad stuff is bad. I mean, this is more sort of like I don't know, Last Man on Earth in that respect, where it's like there's some stuff that is really good that I admire, is well done, but there's other stuff that kind of, is cringeworthy.
Yes. My biggest problem with this film, watching it and in retrospect, was it never seems to decide. It wants to sort of like push the boundaries, but like, is it supposed to be like an outlandish, dark comedy, or is it going to be like we go in sort of like thriller horror? It's got so many bits where it's sort of like you can see the satire, you can see, especially in the second half, like with not even the final third, as it were, with the when he goes into the bunker. And there's some good bits in that. Like there's some good moments. Like we said, like that's when the film really sort of shines to me. Is like the brides all being lined up, and the people being judged in the church, and all these other bits and pieces. Very good. Everyone wearing the weird makeup. But it's sort of, it wants to do horrible things. It wants to be a mean kind of horrible comedy of a movie, which I think it could be. But then it kind of like barks at doing that as well. But then it tells you that its main character is an adolescent rapist.
Oh yeah.
And so it's all over the place.
The misogyny has not aged well, right?
Yeah.
Especially post Me Too. No, I mean, I agree with you. I think that it's kind of a mishmash of sort of, it starts as sort of Mad Max, over the top, it goes into sort of satire. I mean, it has a, dog who communicates by telepathy in it. I mean, it is.
Who, in retrospect, is my favorite character now. That's all I care about.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, if you think about like a description of the plot, it would seem like this is an over the top sort of like insane farcical sort of movie that's going to probably have a dark farce with a dark edge. This is going to be closer to like Tokyo Gore Police,
yes,
than anything. And then what you get is like a straight on the nose, very serious depiction of all of these things.
Yeah.
And that seems to really be wanting to examine how mean and cruel human beings are and what human nature is, but never really gets at that either. It does seem confused, and
Mm.
I think that there's a lot that I like about this. But I think what you identified in talking about it was, to me, the most salient point, which is just nothing works.
Mm.
It's got so many good ideas. It's got good scenes. It does kind of feel like a mishmash of plots and ideas. But ultimately, shot after shot, even when we admire what those shots are doing, like the women waiting in the hallway
Mm.
to be wedded, doesn't work. It's just, there's no love
Flat.
of the image. Yes, it
Yeah.
feels very flat. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I remember us talking about, how like that flat. And I think the other example is that thing when they're in the bunker is um the speakers. There's these speakers coming out the ground, and they're giving like recipes for bacon and all those other bits. And
Mhm.
it should be like weird and kind of, authoritarian and all this other kind of stuff. But because, as you say, because it doesn't linger on them or doesn't focus on them or doesn't shoot them in any specific way, they just kind of feel like they're there.
Mhm.
So there's never a moment when you go like, that's really weird. Like that's, that this is a bizarre place. Um, it's more the actors that provide things. I think that, for example, there's a moment when um the boy, I forget what he's called now, Vic,
Mhm.
is taken up to be judged. Like he's carried up in the bunker and he's in the church, and they basically tell him why he's there. That like, you're good enough, you're going to become basically you're going to impregnate all these women. And he's like, hot dog, like, he thinks it's all good. And he says to that woman who's of the sort of like the council, you're first, like, oh, you first then. And her laugh and her response is, really creepy and really kind of like, oh my God. And that's a moment where you
A
sort
great
of,
moment.
it's a really good moment. But that's the moment when you realize, like, oh, that's what the film should be. Like, it should be like, this is the thing, like, is a terrible person, and we should be following him through this really messed up, creepy world where we kind of realize that he's awful, but he's
Mhm.
not the worst.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And that is kind of the classic way of sort of redeeming, whether it's Mad Max or,
Snake
any kind
Plissken.
of way.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Arnold Schwarzenegger shooting civilians, not a good guy. Um, but yeah, I mean, what struck me as we're talking about this now is that this is a movie that makes a lot of bold choices. I think
Yeah.
one of the most interesting and that I admire it the most for is how irredeemable its main character is. Like I really admire that. I know it's
Mm.
uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's uncomfortable for me. I like being uncomfortable. I mean, I like when stuff makes me uncomfortable. I really do. But it doesn't make any choices about being a movie
Yes.
from a cinematic perspective, from the way something is shot, from the layering of sound and image. It doesn't seem to know that it's a movie.
Hmm.
It makes a lot of bold decisions about plot and character and all of these things, but really makes almost no decisions
Mm.
about how to shoot anything or present anything as a work of cinema. And I think it's fascinating. It's almost fascinating in how completely incapable of
Yeah.
working as cinema it is.
This is almost an example, I think, of being like, say, of something being a complete failure from a cinematic perspective, of like being presented with, um, ideas and concepts that you could really do something with. I mean, you say about, Mad Max, or I say about Snake Plissken, but I think about like, these other ideas of characters of like, if you want to go this kind of dark and zany, but like you want to think they've done it before, there's other films that have done this more recently, even like Guardians of the Galaxy, like you'd have that sort of cadre of like weird characters that you sort of like, yeah, they're the heroes, but they're misfits or whatever, like in the more softer end of things.
Mm, for sure.
But you know, one of the things as well that they kind of spoil is it's played by what's it, Johnson. Don
Don
Johnson.
Johnson.
Don Johnson. Thank you. I knew it was in my head. Vic is played by Don Johnson, who we obviously know from Miami Vice and other things like that. And we even said it in this. Like he brings some charisma. Like he's pretty good as Vic. And so you've got this thing where you're going like, cool. You could be making the audience really uncomfortable by like highlighting how awful he is, but having him played by a charismatic lead that
Mhm.
that sucks you in. So you can be like, oh, he's really entertaining to watch, but I'm kind of like, oh yeah, he's an adolescent rapist. Like you could really do some stuff with this. Yeah, it just doesn't. It has some good ideas. It has some good moments, and then I like the ending. The ending's, you should feel something in this ending. I thought he was a cannibal, but as you rightfully pointed out, he isn't. He just feeds the girl to
It's
dog.
a great ending.
But
I
it's a
mean,
great ending. It's a
again, like the boldness of that choice. How can you not admire that? It's astounding.
yeah. Um, and the irony of the fact we're talking about this just as we've got this sort of like man versus bear, woman versus dog in a desert kind of thing. I'm like, this film answered it in 1975. A guy is always going to choose his dog. In fact, he's going to feed the woman to his dog. Yeah, no, it's got some really bold choices, but like just the flatness and the failure of it is well, it isn't just kind of, is very disappointing.
It is. Now, and this could have been a great movie, right? Like
Oh,
if
it
this were
still could.
directed by like Richard Donner
Yeah.
or as a Mad Max film that, sort of takes every George Miller, kind of takes every idea in Mad Max and just like shoots it within an inch of its life. Uh, you know, Donner who knows how to sell those shots, right? I mean,
Mm.
this would be
Oh,
an amazing movie, right?
I could
Just
still see this.
bizarre
Yeah.
and entertaining.
I mean, the film's set in 2024, but you could set it in the future. But I could still, if someone was, looking for new ideas, a remake of. I'm tired of remakes of films I like. Right?
Mm-hmm.
Do remakes of films that didn't do so well but could be great. A Boy and His Dog is a fantastic example of a film where I'm going, this is an absolute, piss poor attempt, but it could be amazing under the right sort of director. So
Yeah, you can incorporate the prequel stuff as flashbacks. Maybe you don't want to incorporate the sequel stuff because it's not as entertaining, and you want to end with the cannibalism kind of thing or the murder, right? But I mean, that is such a strong ending.
yeah,
But, I mean, yeah, so many great ideas, and I think we agree on this.
yeah, bit of a disappointment. Right, back to Patreon. For another one. For we concluded another franchise.
Yes.
On the main feed, we have talked about the Quatermass Experiment, the Quatermass 2, and Quatermass in the Pit. And then over on Patreon, to finish it out for this one, we talked about the Quatermass Conclusion, which was also a 4-part series on ITV in 1979, called Quatermass. So Bernard Quatermass comes back, my boy Bernard.
And released in theaters as the Quatermass Conclusion.
Yes, yes. So yeah, what do you want to give it?
Well, I think you go first. We'll probably have a disagreement.
I don't know because I'm not so beholden. I do enjoy this. I gave it a 6.
Okay, I gave it a 4.
Oh, yeah, we are going to
Yeah.
disagree.
So yeah, I'm not really sure what the appeal here is. In fact, I'm amazed how little I remember of this movie. I mean, I do quite like the first one we discussed, which was the third one. But this doesn't follow up on that, and sort of like very little makes sense to me. Yeah.
No, I agree with
It was
that.
just poorly done.
I think that's my biggest disappointment with this is that the collapse of society is not a result of the findings of the third film that we're all Martians on some level. That should be that would be amazing. That should be the reason.
In continuity.
Yeah,
right.
So that sort of there. I think with this, I have to say I enjoy the series And I think that's where the 6 comes in for a little bit for me. I can watch both, but in my head I know I've also got the novelization written by Nigel Neal. So I haven't read that, but I will. Um, so yeah, I enjoy it. I think this is not the best version of Quatermass. I still think that Quatermass in the Pit, the Hammer version, is definitely my favorite, and I think
I agree.
Andrew Keir is definitely the best. But there's some really cool stuff in this. There's some really good ideas. It has more money, but it still feels kind of like it still feels a bit Doctor Who-ish, which is kind of funny.
So what is this movie about? This is about an old doddering man who's looking for his daughter
Granddaughter
and drives his granddaughter and drives past a bunch of hippies who are in the thrall of a space cult that is shooting Earth and killing humans for an unknown reason.
Yeah.
And have been here before, yet aren't visiting again. I mean, none of and ultimately he detonates a nuclear weapon so it can be sucked up into outer space through the laser that they're shooting us with, as his granddaughter appears in one of the most painfully awful sequences I've ever seen.
Yes.
I mean, it makes like Attack of the Killer Tomatoes look serious. I mean,
yeah, I'm not gonna lie.
Yeah,
the ending,
none of this is great. I mean, it's not terrible, right?
The finale is bad. I'll concede that. Like, the finale is awful. They want obviously to finish off Bernard Quatermass, and I appreciate the sacrifice, but it's the fact that it's done in such a vague way, and then his granddaughter turns up is awful. This thing though of using sort of standing stones and stone circles and stuff and having them linked with was in the zeitgeist. I mean, we should highlight that obviously, over here, Stonehenge has obviously been around for 1,000 years, but we should really mention that actually in the late 60s it was rebuilt. So it was a bit of a national thing. It was raised. So it was in the zeitgeist throughout the 70s, and that sort of hippie movement sort of came with it. And this sort of the space cult thing is all part and parcel of that. So it feels like I like that, but I like this other thing you and I have talked about this all the way back to the very, very first season with like Solaris. This idea of not knowing what the bloody hell this alien thing's about, like just not being able to comprehend it. Like, we've said this before. I prefer aliens to be weird and unhuman. So the fact that this laser is doing this thing and nobody knows why, I'm fine with that. I am completely fine because we're not supposed to know. We're just the cattle or the fodder or whatever it is for it. I don't like the finale of being like, we're going to blow a 35 megaton nuclear weapon to take it out, but that's neither here nor there. But I like this sort of thing of him sort of like seeing, this generational pull between the planet people, the young people that are feeling this sort of, separation from society versus the sort of the people that are trying to cling on to what was before the sort of collapse and that. In this idea of sort of like, you see the urban decay versus, welcoming back to the land and all this other stuff, which is all part and parcel of the 70s, like this back to the land, sort of self-sustaining and all these other things. So I don't know, it works on a sort of maybe there's, I don't know, it's right. There's like a British history element to this as well, where I'm like, oh yeah, that's totally where the 70s was, and I feel that as part of its appeal to me. Plus I think I'm just on that sort of the Quatermass trip, to be perfectly honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think about like the inclusion of ley lines. I mean, like nothing in this really works. I mean, so you made the comparison to Stellaris. I'm fine with the ambiguity, but I mean, 2001 it has ambiguity, right? But you basically know what's going on, right? I mean, Solaris, you basically know what's going on, right? This entity is trying to communicate. But in Solaris, like shot after shot is creepy, is weird, is interesting. And yes, I'm puzzling to figure out what it means, but and even in some cases, what character is which. But I'm puzzling through these, and it's about something. It's about how we understand, like, loss of our dead wife. It's about, how we understand how we can communicate. and how we strive to communicate. I mean, it's filled with these interesting ideas about like an abandoned space station, all of this. What are the ideas here? Um, you know, like ley lines are real. Okay, that's not really interesting. Like, stone Paleolithic kind of monuments, like, are actually connected to extraterrestrials somehow. Well, that's actually an insulting bad idea, right? Like,
No,
that's
they didn't. No, the standing stones aren't. Those places are. The standing
right.
stones were created by people, still created by humans as a marker to say, basically, don't go there.
Yeah, but I mean, like what's interesting about that would be like, um, the ways in which alien contact had shaped human history in ways that we don't know, right? So, like, I would be way more interested to see like a scene set in the 1700s of somebody visiting Stonehenge and sort of like not understanding like this lost thing about our history, right? Like
Mm.
that's interesting. Here, it's just a plot device to get lasers from outer space to turn us into salt. I mean, I, for sustenance, but we don't really know. I mean, but it's connected to ley lines. But I mean, this is, and like the hippie thing, the cult thing, that's interesting, except they're right. And there really are aliens trying to,
Well,
take us into outer space, but they're not really right because they're
yeah.
eating us. Maybe we don't really know. So let's get a bomb. I mean, I don't think almost anything in this is really working.
Oh, okay. I got this because I do find that there's this
Okay,
thing around. No, all that I see what you're saying,
sure.
but I like this idea of sort of like this interconnectivity of these things and that the generation because it's kind of like it's a weird indictment, and this is obviously I said this like Nigel Neal was getting older at the time, and it feels like he'd been kind of almost hopeful in the past with the Quatermass ones. This idea of like shit happens, but like we're going to push through it and we're going to do these things. Quatermass was almost like that as a hopeful sort of blustering through these kinds of things. This one kind of feels there's a sort of a bitterness to this one, and it's almost like bloody young people kind of thing.
Mhm.
Um, but he's also like anti-establishment. Like you get this idea of I just find this idea of the tearing of society between clinging to what we know as a society and this idea of, but then also this blindly leading into a cult. Like Quatermass is sort of sat in the middle, and I think in this one I feel like Quatermass represents Neil. Like in Quatermass is like, I've been tucked away in my little Scottish cottage. I've been unaware of all this kind of nonsense, and I think the Planet People is like an indictment of the cult culture that was sort of growing in, I think, the 70s. You had the several UFO based cults sort of like coming up during that period. So he's sort of saying that's crazy. Like, just giving in and going along with it is nuts. Like there's still science and stuff. Like he's sort of saying it's this young new age silliness. Like, these people are young and silly. But he's still kind of blaming the older people. Like there's the kind of like we're old because it's all about the especially in the series you've sort of realised that there's much more of these old people contributing and still being vital. But he's also saying there's this indictment of people giving up and being old and saying like, look, just because you're old doesn't mean you're not still relevant and important and you can contribute by being wise and guiding this younger generation. Like you've kind of caused this mess, you've got to help them through it. And I think that's what it's trying to say. But what I would say, which is interesting, is a lot of that gets lost in the translation from from the series to
Mhm.
the film. There's a number of there's some scenes that get lost. Like we've said, there's a whole bit. I think you sort of saw it, like where he gets involved with a whole bunch of old people that live in a bunch of cars, like in a
Yeah.
in a wreck, and he has all these conversations with them about how they're sort of protected by these gangs, but how they remember being younger and all this other stuff and da da da. And then he also gets into a TV show at one point, and it's a kids show, but and we've sort of joked about this, we've sort of talked about this thing off air. It's called it's a family show. Sorry, they refer to it as a family show, but there's women dancing around in like bikinis, and there's all this sort of innuendo on the show, and he's like, we can't turn this off. This is the biggest live, the most sort of successful live broadcast show in decades, and he's talking about how this is another indictment of 70s television just
Mhm.
being titillation,
Mhm.
all this other stuff. So there's all these
But
like
that sounds very Nigel Neal. Right?
100%. Like
Yeah.
the series is him like punching away at like, the BBC and ITV and all these channels and stuff and doing this stuff. But like again, I feel that when they strip it down to the film, it comes solely about the core
The
plot,
alien threat and
the
the
alien
trolls
threat.
and
And I feel you're right in that by stripping it down to that, I don't think that's what Neil really cared about at that
it
point.
loses some of its heart, right? And
Yeah.
some of its heart is really the struggling with age and struggling with
Mm.
cultural change. And yeah.
Yeah. But that's in the series and not and I think there's less of that in the film, and I think that's part of the point. So I would say maybe I
Haven't
have
seen the series. I'm judging the movie.
no, that's
Right?
fine, and that's fair. And I
Yeah.
think that you are completely right. And maybe my score should shift, and maybe it should because I have that baggage and that carrying. So the film does work a hell of a lot less than the series. I think the series is much, much better. And I mean, it runs to like 3.5 hours
Mhm.
rather than like 90 minutes or 900 or 100 minutes as the film does. So there's a lot. There's so much more in there. So yeah, it's a bit of. I will admit though, compared to the previous films, it goes on. It goes out on a bit of a whimper.
Yeah. I mean, I think we've come kind of together and, a little bit. I mean, I am amazed in the film how, and I see very much what you're saying. I'm amazed how, like, even things like the stadium scene does not work, right? I
Yeah,
mean, um, he's sort of like racing through the garage. I don't know why this laser penetrates and kills some people in it, but not
yeah.
him. It's a close-up shot of light on his face. I mean, you know, it just doesn't work for him.
I mean,
And it should be a cliffhanger, right? I get that
mm,
that's like an episode cliffhanger, right?
it is. Yeah,
It should feel like that. I mean, I'm if you hit the structural beats, I'm usually pretty easy to sell.
yeah.
But if I don't understand why we're getting the structural beats in the first place, or why they're there, or why they're important, if they don't work, I'm I'd rather you just have no plot.
Yeah, one of the interesting things about the stadium in particular is really you make a really good point is it does feel kind of undersold. Like again, it's that thing of show don't tell. They keep telling you, and actually they tell you in retrospect, like the next day,
Hmm.
they're like, "This was a massacre. People were killing each other with guns and knives, and it was violence and all this other stuff." And you go, "Cool."
That's news to me, and I watched it.
Yeah, I've
Yeah.
seen multiple versions. I don't. What was that all about? So there is that where you sort of go, well, I should have known that. Like there should have been a sense of how dangerous that stadium was. But you can feel that like they're pulling back. Like, oh, we can't show that. We can't show that level of violence, or we can't do this budgetary or uh, age restriction kind of
Broadcast
thing. Broadcast
restrictions.
restriction, yeah.
Yeah.
So and it's littered with those kinds of things. So yes, so it's a bit of a shame. Um, Maybe one day we'll get more Quatermass and the rights will go to the good someone good and we'll get it all sorted and we'll get a good version of this whole thing back. Anyway,
We'll get the Disney Plus version that's designed for 13-year-olds.
that's right. Yeah, in which none of the cliffhangers or mysteries will matter at all at the end because we're all special. Um, anyway, right, let's get out to well, which we do.
Last battle.
Let's do the last battle because I want to end on
That's
the day
80.
after. Yeah,
Yeah, that's 83. That's April, and then the day
yeah.
after is November.
Yeah, okay. Let's do the last battle then. Luc Besson's um, early cinematic efforts.
Yeah,
What
it
are your
was.
scores?
So I gave this this will probably be greater than your score. I gave it a 10 out of 10. Now I gave it a 5.5.
Okay.
So here again, I reserve my right to just kind of like tweak something a half a point for
Hmm.
if it's about something or doing something. I think this is really, in terms of my experience of the film, is really a fun. It's got some good scenes. It's got, whatever. It's got some things to recommend it. It's also got some amateurish kind of stuff that doesn't work. It's different. It's interesting. For me, the fact that it's silent and it's doing something different and I, can think about it kind of elevates it slightly to more like a 5.5 instead
Okay.
of okay.
I gave this a 3.5.
Ooh, wow. You thought my Quatermass was
Yeah.
tough.
Yeah, this is one of, you've said about those things, it just doesn't work.
Mhm.
I agree with you on some of the points. I like the fact it's almost silent and you have to interpret a lot of what's going on. Um, and some of the scenes are kind of interesting. I find the opening section probably the most interesting. Um, but like things like with the small person going down to get the water and the whole thing with the guy who owns him putting him in the boot of the car and all, and then our hero, the man, trying to get it going wrong and him escaping on his sort of like his microlight. All that's kind of okay. But beyond that, the problem I had with this, I think what you said was like, it just feels like really, really meandering. And I just kind of again, I was just sort of like, okay. You said about sort of like you get halfway through and you're like, oh, yeah, I'm halfway through this. Like that's how it felt. Like you went from scene to scene. And there's some interesting scenes like it rains fish at one point, and there's the development of the like almost like cave paintings on the wall to then being that of a woman and all those things.
That's great. That's fascinating,
It is
right?
interesting. It is interesting, but again, like I don't, as you said before, like I don't think it kind of like amounts to anything. Um, and even this thing with like the beast, sort of like the brute, sorry, sort of like trying to chase them down. It all kind of like there's some interesting bits, but it all feels like I don't know.
It's just kind of there,
It
right?
just just kind of there,
The
like
thing
things
that
gonna happen.
happens.
Mm.
Yeah.
And then by the
That's kind
end
of
of
how I
it,
feel about, the Furiosa complaint that I
yeah, I think it's that thing of like things. I feel it more so in this, but but
have. Mhm.
nothing in this kind of, and I'm not bothered by it being like black and white or being silent. Like that's kind of interesting. It just kind of feels like there's so much just there, and then even like as it climaxes with him going back and taking over as the Water King or whatever it is or whatever the hell whatever that final bit. I'm all a bit like, all right, okay, all right. I'm not
No,
sure
I
where.
mean, I think that framing thing kind of works as like an origin for the French Mad Max, right? Like
Mm,
he's encountered these people, he goes off and has this painful experience and comes back and, is Mad Max in a suit, sort of like kind of a hero, kind of not. But yeah, I mean, I will say like this is, I think where we hit upon in discussing it was that it was sort of like not entertaining enough, doesn't communicate well enough, and doesn't think through the implications of not being able to speak, right?
yes,
And I
yes.
think that was, so what I would compare this to is A Boy and His Dog.
Mm,
That
mm.
both, like, Boy and His Dog has a lot of ideas and interesting things, but it's just kind of flat. I think this similarly has a lot of interesting ideas. It's got some great scenes, some great shots. I love like the gates and I love the cave paintings and all that stuff. But it's doesn't really work, right? It seems
Mm.
less than the sum of its parts. It's not as flat as A Boy and His Dog, but it's but it's maybe even less engaging, you know? So to me, those are kind of comparable movies.
Yeah, no, I think that's fair. I think that's I can see what you say. It's that thing, like I think with the boy and his dog, I was shocked by some of the bits and pieces in it. Do you know what I mean? It has those sort of like, oh Christ, they're going to do that, or it may not look good, but they're going to do something weird, or they're going to have like some guy with his people that live in a hole in the ground. Like it's got specklings of like Python-esque almost humor at times, that sort of thing, that weirdness. Yeah, but with the last battle, it just kind of feels very sort of like nonchalant about the whole thing.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's
It
very
certainly is.
French.
It's less than the sum of its parts, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I do think that consistently, I am sort of like, I don't know. I think that I think we're both kind of intolerant of plots that don't make any kind of sense.
Hmm.
I think that I'm sort of tolerant of kind of like some slow scenes where I'm not really sure what it's doing, but it's kind of like some interesting shots. I mean, there's a love of abandoned buildings here that I think is, interesting. I can kind of lose myself in those shots, even if I don't think it's doing a good job of selling the characters or their motivations. I can kind of tolerate that stuff, especially if like it's silent. There's something that's kind of like interesting me, logically or intellectually, yeah. But no, I mean, it's for sure. This is not a good movie. I mean, it feels like a student film.
Yes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I mean, this is, this is one of those interesting things. We have done several early doors films for people. We've talked about Mad Max with George Miller. We've talked about THX with George Lucas. I feel this is the similar thing for like Luc Besson, where you can sort of see it and you go, I can see a germ of something that's gonna become a vision in the future. Like, there's an idea or there's some sort of like shots or there's bits and pieces where you go, oh, okay, I can see that approach, or I can see an idea that's going to become, Nikita, or
Mm.
what's it, The Professional, those kinds of things. So yeah, but to me, it just falls flat. This is a film. Even there's been films in the past where that have been a challenge, and I've sort of ragged on, and I've talked about things from like
Hard to be a god.
Hard to Be a God, yeah, or
Solaris.
Solaris, yeah, or Alphaville.
Yeah.
But I think about those, like every
Mhm.
single one of those, I will reference because I'm like, even years later with
Yeah.
like Solaris or even Alphaville, like I remember them. They have struck a chord with me that I may have said at the time, like, yeah, it didn't quite work, or I didn't like this, I didn't like that, but they've stuck with me. Where I've sort of gone, yeah, that the Alphaville swimming pool scene is kind of dark and weird, and there's bits that I like. I struggle to remember the last battle, and I watched it like a week and a bit ago. Like it just hasn't resonated with me in that way. That
Yeah,
those
there's
other
no
films.
doubt this is an inferior
Mm.
film to that. I guess I don't think that it's poorly made. I think it's
No.
got I think it's got a lot that to recommend it, even though it's not. It's interesting and it's got a lot to recommend it, even though it's not a good movie. It's not a haunting movie.
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's sort of like more of a footnote or sort of early Luc Besson
Yeah,
kind of thing.
homework. This is that sort of thing. If you're going to do a person's full filmography, you'd be like, okay, I've got to do that, but to get to the other stuff. Um, so yeah. All right, let's move on to a film that did have an impact.
Very much so.
1983. Later in 1983, American TV movie. We haven't really done many of these. The Day After. Um, I'll go first on this. And this score
We're
is,
gonna disagree. I can tell you.
yeah,
We both like this movie. We're probably going to agree on everything, but we'll disagree on the score.
okay.
That's my prediction here.
Okay, my score for this is kind of interesting because I have to sort of caveat it because I think I said it in the podcast. I'm going to say I acknowledge the TV movie of this, that this isn't a Hollywood blockbuster thing. This still gets a 7.5 from me.
Okay, we're not that far off. I thought you were going to give it an 8.
Mm,
Was my prediction. So I gave this a 7.
mm,
So we're very close. I mean, I think like almost everything in this movie works. I mean, like
mm,
I feel bad giving it a 7, right? Because like like for me, the standout of this season outside of the Mad Max movies is On the Beach.
mm,
And I just think On the Beach is really well made. It's deep. It's it's well acted. It's well shot. There are some problems with it that we talked about, but I mean, for me, that is kind of the closest to The Day After in terms of its message, and and The Day After is so character driven. It's so like
mm.
scene after scene after scene. Like the dialogue is not good dialogue. It's just
No.
not. Acting is not especially good acting, but it's shot so well and it's edited so well that like having these old shots of like rockets from the 50s,
Yeah.
like somehow the movie transcends all of these elements and just works, right? So I think in terms of its influence, in terms of its impact on you watching it, it's much closer to an 8, right?
Mm.
And I could even see, if you're that kind of viewer, if that's how you weight these things, that it's a better movie for you than On the Beach. From just that emotional, visceral, this is working level. But I just can't get over how raw the sort of like amateurish, this, just like low budget, bad acting, weird cutting early kind of, and ultimately compared to On the Beach is a lot more realistic.
Mm.
This is, painful, has a lot of, brilliantly done painful moments as you watch these characters die, but also pulls its punches, much like, On the Beach kind of cuts before it shows somebody
Yes.
suffocating. This does that too. And it works more on an emotional basis, but actually it's less realistic. It's a little less fatalistic. If anything, these people should be dead way before those people in
Yeah.
Australia. So yeah, I don't know. Those are my initial
No, no,
thoughts.
I know what you're saying. I think you said about that visceral reaction, giving it that thing. That's what ups it for me. Because you are right, like there is terrible soap opera dialogue in this at times, and some of the acting is clunky and a little flat. Like there are people that stand out. Like I'm always going to be pleased to see John Lithgow on anything. Um, there's a couple of others, and Steve Guttenberg and a young Steve Guttenberg, sort of like pre-Police Academy, kind of interesting to see. All that's interesting. It's the I think one of the things I like about this, and that has been sort of working in my head a little bit since we talked about it and since we watched it, was, and you say about the editing, is the structure of this. Like it's 2 hours 6 minutes, right? That's how long it sort of goes, but it's kind of like a 2 hour film. But it works like a clock in the way that it's
Mm-hmm.
edited and the way it's put together. Like that first hour, even if you don't realize it, is a countdown. Like
Yeah,
you are
it's
you are
brilliant how it ratchets up the
oh,
yeah.
it's giving you
Oh, yeah.
indicators again and again. Like I joked about earlier on about that, the doomsday clock getting closer to midnight. Like the way that if you're paying attention to this film, there's details throughout that are just telling you this, and people are discussing like, well, if this happens, this is what's going to happen, and we're not, the great line where it says like, in a nuclear war, there's no such place as in the middle of nowhere. Like, we're right next to a nuclear
Mm-hmm.
silo. Um, it keeps ratcheting up, and then when it happens, again, you're right. The budget's restraints on this are kind of in just are most obvious during the attack. Like, but I don't care. I've had films, I think we've said before, where I'm like, yeah, I'm really let down by the special effects. Like, it looks crap. And so I can't invest in that, or it takes me out of it. It does a little bit because there is that element of almost like 1970s Daleks attack, sort of like
Mm-hmm.
the skeleton appearing as they get shot, which is even true of more like recent Doctor Who, but I'm fine with that effect because of who you are seeing getting obliterated. There are several scenes when you're like, oh shit, like, they've taken that person out. Like, as you sort of described it, it's like a disaster movie. And then it's sort of like the second hour, again, acts as this sort of, it's not a clock, but like, it just keeps sort of giving you these moments. And I think one of the things I'm most impressed with this film is, I said, we said it was the makeup.
Mm-hmm.
Like they're gonna do things to people. Like they're gonna do. We got some pretty people in the first half. We haven't got any pretty people in the second half. Like we're gonna do stuff to people, and by the end of it, you've got people with their hair falling out. You've got, and the scene more than any in this. There's two scenes in the second half that really sort of have stuck with me and kind of literally like that sort of crop up in your mind all of a sudden. You're like, oh shit, is the scene where Steve Guttenberg's character sort of working through that gym, the gymnasium, looking for the girl, and he
Mm.
finds her on the thing, and they have that conversation, but then it sort of like pans out, it pulls out, and you've just got this sort of like tens or dozens of people in this sort of room, all these extras, like this is not CGI, nothing here. There's just lots of people, but laying around and just sort of like exhausted from the radiation sickness, and they all look awful and something. And that scene really kind of hit home with me. And so, but you get these scenes throughout, like and to me, it just sort of like I'm able to get past some of those elements that that I know don't work, and I recognize and acknowledge there are things that don't work. But when it culminates in that, the other one that culminates is that scene at the end. We've been following this doctor who had lived in Oklahoma or Kansas City. I forget which now, but
Kansas, yeah.
Kansas, thank you. And he goes back and he finds, he's really getting ill, like he's losing his hair.
Or Missouri, right over the right.
Yeah, and he goes into this crater and a mess that's just like a chimney stack. And there's some great shots there, and it's his old house, and he finds these moments, and he finds these memories, these things, and that, and he looks over at this people, and he just says, "Get out of my house." And it's just sort of like the hopelessness of it, and I'm just like, wow. Like this film is like really sort of slap you about the face. Like, it's, I don't know, just these moments work for me, and they've hung with me since I've watched it in a weird kind of
they have
way.
for me too. And I mean, I don't know. I mean, we all have our sort of biases. I mean, I think that I have thought about this movie a lot since we watched it and talked about it. And I think that it is such a powerfully directed film. I have massive respect for Nicholas Meyer.
Oh yeah.
And I think in some ways more for this than even for Star Trek 2 because of what he's working with, here. And for the courage of doing this, right? I mean, he had to fight to make sure this would all get in there to be broadcast on, network television. But I guess that, when I think about a rating, I sort of think like I'm judging like how good of a movie it is. When I think about like On the Beach, I think, okay, so both this and On the Beach are very similar in their message, right? They both have something to say there about something. This one is more emotional. That one is a little more, maybe cerebral, maybe a little more old fashioned.
Yes.
But that one is impeccably written. It's written like it is, they're trying for it to stand the test of time next to a great play.
Yes.
This is not, right? The actors of that one are trying to deliver, Oscar-winning performances, that are going to be taken seriously next to any drama released that year. This one is not, right? And so I think I find it very hard to get over kind of just technical errors where I think like the acting isn't up to par, the editing isn't up to par. Some of these shots are embarrassing. There are, I mean, much like A Boy and His Dog, which is like there are scenes that are just cut seconds too early, and you think you just stepped over the effect of the scene. Now that one comes off as very flat. Boy and His Dog does, and this comes off as very emotional. But I think it's hard for me, and I think this applies to Quatermass 4 as well. That like thinking about that ending and some of those shots, I think oh, this is just embarrassing on a technical level. It's hard, when I think about where I want to rate something, I think it's really hard for me to, go overly high with this just for those technical reasons.
No, I agree.
Is this a good movie?
Yeah.
Technically speaking. Now, look, it is good, right? A 7. This is a good movie. Its heart, how it sells its scenes emotionally. This is a 9. I mean, this is a 9 in terms of just knowing the emotional core of a scene and being able to just invisibly drive that core home like a knife to the heart. I mean, this is sublime in its ability to do so. But on a technical basis, it's just closer to a 5 or a 6, right? So
yeah, no, I see what you're saying. I agree I do agree. I understand what you're saying, and this is that thing. I think I think we've sort of touched on this before. Like, how do you approach the ranking of this? And I think you're right. I think you have said before about the technical aspects. And I do try. I keep that in mind. But I think I've given it this. There's a half a point in here for me
Yeah.
for this where I'm on par with what you're saying, and I said before, like there's some scenes in this that you are like, oof, there's another take to be done there. Like, let's try that one again. Um, but to me, I think it's my reaction to this, and I think one of the things I'm a bit of a glutton for is this historical context, and I think I'm almost given half a point from like, what not just what this is as in a film, but what it did. Where you see about swinging for the fences. Where I'm like, this is a TV movie that does this, and it's still talked about, and like, you can get this on Blu-ray. Like, not many do that. Not many films allegedly scare a president so much that Nicholas Meyer showed this early to people so that they could get groundswell of support and called the campaign the day before. Like, there's an element of that around it where I'm like this, but also this is almost like a cultural milestone, a cultural sort of
historical importance.
It is, yeah, it has historical import, and I think that's why I kind of like that extra little mark for me, that extra point is that kind of thing where I'm going like, I've kind of should watch this in an interesting kind of. It's in my lifetime, early in my lifetime, but still in my lifetime. That sort of, yeah, this is what the '80s were about. This is this thing of the early '80s. It's kind of like it felt close for a lot of people. So yeah, I don't know, but you're right. I think from a Nicholas Meyer point of view, he's like, right, I've made people cry with the death of Spock. How do I top? How do I top that?
Well, that's an interesting point because that's also a scene that like should not work as well as it does, right? And it's so classic. And you look at like Star Trek Into Darkness, and it cannot imitate that scene. You cannot recapture that cinematic magic that Nicholas Meyer could bring. And and I do think that Spielberg can do this sometimes. I do think that some of the great directors, are able to hit that kind of like emotional core where you sort of watch it and you say, I'm not sure why this is working as well as it does. This is an absurd scene on many levels. There are a lot of reasons to object to it, but it makes me cry every time.
Yeah.
And and look, at the end of the day, narrative art, is usually better off shooting for that emotional effect rather than making sure everything makes perfect sense and what have you. So
I think just to hammer that home, I think we should highlight, this thing that shouldn't work. It's a very sort of rote disaster movie sort of setup, isn't it? Like, this is a very sort of by the numbers in many cases as well. Like, it's kind of predictable in some cases. Compared to A Boy and His Dog, where you're like, this is a messed up kind of incredibly dark story. This is the opportunity to do something groundbreaking and really push boundaries and, do something incredibly cinematic yet, shocking in some way. Yet that comes out incredibly flat and doesn't work, even though it has some interesting shots. But even then, like you said, it misses passion, it misses the heart. And then this TV movie, which 40 years later we're talking about, and has actually affected me to the extent I would recommend younger generations. I would recommend this to people to say, check this out. Like, this is, an oddity that should really be seen. It comes down, you say that directors, the impact a good director with a vision and technical capability can make the real difference. And so yeah, no, I think that's a really good point, but it's an odd one.
Well, I mean, it's certainly everyone needs to see it. So, I mean, looking back on the entire season, I mean, if we bracket the Mad Max movies, which we're both, I think big fans of, and, and I think rate very highly as a franchise. I mean, for me, the real standouts and the ones that I would say are just essential viewing for anybody is, On the Beach, which is not talked about, sort of fallen into obscurity, but so good. And Silent Running. which is ahead of its time. And the day after, which is of its time. But, and I do agree, more emotional. But for me, I would say, those are the three that really have stood out for me.
I think you and I are very much on par with the On the Beach. I mean, I gave it a 7. I did really enjoy. I did like that film. I think there's some really good. I agree. I still can't believe it's not as well known and spoken about as it is. I think it should be. As you say, The Day After, I agree. I think that's the one that stands out for me. I'm really glad I've seen it now. Weirdly, the next one for the next one for me, as I take them from this sort of Mad Max aside, is the Omega Man, which, although I think it's a mess, and that finale, that last sort of 15 to 20 minutes, is awful. Like it's bizarre in how bad it seems to come together. I think it's one of those films where I'm like, yeah, but but this bit's good, and then that bit's good, and I'm kind of like, it's I wouldn't if it was on TV, I wouldn't just go, oh, I'm gonna sit there and watch that. But it is one of those films I may get round to. Like, it's been a couple of years, like it's been 3 or 4 years. Oh, I might stick. I might check out the Omega Man again. Like, let's just go and see if I've changed my opinions on it, or let's go see those scenes. I do think it has. I think there is some interesting points to be made about its historical significance, but we've done.
Yeah, the comparison is interesting there because I can see myself seeing the Omega Man on TV and just being like, yeah, I'll dive into this. I think so much of it though depends on Heston's charisma.
Yes.
And I do think Heston is, he sells that to a great degree. And I like the Penthouse too. But I think that every time I watch it on TV, I'd be like,
what's coming.
I wanted to watch this, but I forgot how bad this is. Like,
that's the problem.
By the end of it, I'd be like, this is bad. And I think like Silent Running, I would say like, it's a little boring. It's a little, but I would say like, oh, its heart is in the right place. Like, this is kind of great, like, and I don't know if that's me just being a contrarian and going like, the action's here, but what's it about versus like, it's a little boring, but like, I see its spirit, it's speaking to me. Maybe I'm just a tree hugger at heart.
Maybe I think that's what it is. That's where you move to Hawaii, so you can just get it on with nature.
I have been known to hug trees and cry just looking at a beautiful tree.
Well, they're much more appealing than some people. So, I would say that you and I, we've now done the Omega Man. You and I, on, I believe, for 20th Century Geek, we did the Planet of the Apes films. We've done Heston on there. We kind of need to do Soylent Green now at some point. Film.
Oh yeah. Well, plus it's a classic. I mean, I do sometimes think that we need to. At some point, we're going to have to like go back and just say like, okay, what are the big names that we have not done?
The big classics we haven't touched on. Yeah, I agree. But overall, it's been good half season so far. I think it's been some interesting films, and it's been kind of an interesting time to be doing this. The way the world is in a different, an odd political situation. So, good for us for doing post-apocalyptic films in an era when we're going to be living in a post-apocalypse pretty soon. But we've got more to come. This is our mid-season review. We've gone back and looked at it, but we're not jumping directly into the post-apocalypse just yet, because we want to do something a little bit more light-hearted. We want to do something that's going to, sunshine and rainbows. So we're going to do the Alien franchise, leading up to Alien Romulus. So the next 5 episodes, hopefully, is the way it works out for them, is going to be Alien, Aliens, Alien 3, Alien Resurrection, which is the one I'm kind of looking forward to the most, actually, with the discussion, and then Alien Romulus, which will be the new release. So we'll be doing those for the next couple of weeks, and then we will be back into the season, and we're going to be doing
refreshed from the clear lemonade space of the Alien series back into the apocalypse.
Yes, we're going to be doing Nausicaa and the Valley of the Wind, Delicatessen, Tank Girl, which is I'm very much looking forward to that film. The Postman, bit of Kevin Costner, can't go wrong. Children of Men, and we're going to end on a delightful romp, The Road, before we do.
We might disagree that you can't go wrong with Kevin Costner, but
yeah, Kevin Costner.
Not to mention Threads and a bunch of other stuff on the Patreon, supplementing the regular episodes.
Well, that's it, exactly. Yeah, much. We've got another part of the our Patreon support season. We've got Threads, which is the sort of the British version, came out a year later. But this is the British equivalent to The Day After. We then have an animated post-apocalyptic film,
When the Wind Blows.
When the Wind Blows, which, just in a side note, actually, my daughter is moving to secondary school in September. We went to see the school just as a bit of preparation. We walked through the library, and they had a copy of the original graphic novel of When the Wind Blows.
Oh, wow.
In the library. So I was a bit like, I grabbed it. I was like, look at this. This is cool. Nobody seemed to give two monkeys. So it's just me that flipped through it, and I was very excited. The
important thing is that we ensure that the next generation is traumatized in the same ways.
Yeah. Yes, you've had a good afternoon. Here's Watership Down, When the Wind Blows, and other. Yes, when was Hell Comes to Frogtown?
Charlotte's Web.
Oh gosh, oh yeah, God, just weeping children left, right, and centre. Hell Comes to Frogtown, Six String Samurai, On the Beach 2000, which is an Australian TV show remake, and then we end with 2013's Oblivion. Which is a great looking film, but does it stand up as a good film? So yeah, got lots and lots of post-apocalyptic goodies to come yet, both on the main feed and on our Patreon. So go check out over there, links down below. But it's basically just look for 20th Century Geek on Patreon. £5 a month gives you access to all these kind of things. But there's other things as well. There's other layers on there. There's other things you can pay for that gives you access to do bits and pieces. So yeah,
it's a great deal.
It is.
I subscribe. I love it, and I love what you're doing there, and we really want to keep this going.
We do, because there's stuff coming. We've got things like Kurosawa coming. We've got the books still in the works. We are writing it and doing bits and pieces in that. So we've got essays coming for Stories Out of Time and Space, and other things as well. So much more stuff coming. Just time and life get in the way at times. But for now, Julian, thank you very much for this sort of review conversation. It's been good fun.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.
And ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for listening in. And do contribute, feedback, critique, or whatever you want to say. Just keep it friendly. But for now, let us know what you think. Do you agree with our scores? Yes or no? And what do you think of the films that we've got coming up? Any thoughts on them?
You guys are idiots. You don't know anything about cinema. You've just reviewed 100 science fiction movies, but you have no idea what you're talking about. Okay.
No, that's it. But, tell us why we're wrong. I'm happy to be told I'm wrong. But make good points. Make points. Show us why we're wrong. Sure. But anyway, for now, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. And we shall see you on the next episode.